So, Berto, as a Japanese American, you would think I would at least know more about Japanese culture than my wife, who's white American. But today she told me that apparently in Japanese culture around New Year's Eve, and I don't even know if this is true around New Year's time, it is traditional to do spring cleaning. So it'd be like New Year's Eve or New Year's Day cleaning where you clean up all the clutter, you get rid of stuff, you take stuff to Goodwill,
to start the new year on the good foot.
Yeah, which I might have been enacting this whole time because one of the things that I've done the past number of years, at the end of the year, I try to answer all the emails that are left in the documents saved from
Clean house,
yeah, and start afresh. So I have a bunch of emails that people have been asking you and me.
Yeah.
So let's get to it. What do you say?
Let's do it.
This is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk Honda, and although these emails spark joy, I want to get to them and get them off my docket. What do you say? Who are you, Berto?
My name is Humberto Castañeda, and I'm an international corn maze debunker.
Listener Eve has a question. Actually, this is kind of a trigger warning. This is about stalking, potentially a real stalking situation, so skip forward about 10 minutes. She says, I met a guy on Tinder one time for a public coffee date. He gave me a creepy vibe on the date. He questioned our relationship status and said, don't leave me. I turned him down gently, and after 2 weeks, he showed up at my workplace. I gathered I should be very clear the next time I meet him and tell him that I'm not interested and never will be interested, and then I should stop any communication. I'm afraid, though, that his stalking behavior might turn into violence. Please advise. Berto, what do you think?
Wow, that is intense. I do think clarity is necessary, even if it doesn't work, because at least you've set that antecedent. Like, for example, if you, hopefully not, but if you had to get the authorities involved, I think, my layman perspective is that it'd be great to say, hey, I have clearly, like, here's the text message or here's whatever. But I will say that if I were in this boat, which I've never been, luckily, but if I were, I would be scared. So I would probably get my friends involved. Like, I would talk to my friends about it too, like just to have a sense of community, because it's intimidating.
Yeah. So here are some things to do for sure in no particular order. And these are in line with some of the things Berto is saying. Number one is to get emotional support, as Berto was saying, talk with other people, maybe even a stalker helpline or a stalker. Yeah. There's probably like a stalker subreddit that you can go to and get support and connect with people. Number two is to be clear, potentially, with him. But really, before you communicate at all to him, I would do a number of other things first. One is to document everything, like write everything down, because you never know, as you were saying, if you ever have to get the authorities involved, you can have everything there ready to go. Because it might happen for a while and you might kind of forget all the details.
Right.
Also, I would call the police and see what they say. There's a chance that they'll say, well, let us know if he makes a threat or something like this. But there's a possibility that the authorities in your area might have a resource, or even they might say, well, if you feel that he's being scary, we can help you submit a no contact order, something like this. Also, I would get legal advice from an expert. I don't know if you have access to that, but talking to someone who understands the law and how you can use the law to protect yourself. Also, I would find information about how to deal with stalkers in general. There are experts on this online that you can hire, people who know how to manage this sort of thing. I actually have a friend who works for he has his own security business, and he is a high-end security boutique business that, like, Bill Gates and other people hire him to secure his house or to hire a security team, have bulletproof cars. And so he works with all those upper end people, and there are a lot of stalkers, and he deals with them. He doesn't call the authorities. He is the hired authority, because the police don't necessarily do anything. So what he does, and so, I know he has a lot of experience with weapons and violence and all that kind of stuff. He that's his background, which is what led him to that business. And so I asked him what he does with the stalkers. In my head, it was something like The Sopranos, where you show up
You better not see the whites of your eye again around here.
Yeah. You like your kneecaps, buddy? Because, if we see them again, they're gone.
Yeah.
And he said, though, that no, actually what we do is we usually see evidence that the person has a mental illness and is over-focusing on a particular person. And so what we do is we figure out who their family members are and we reach out to them.
Right.
And we tell them that your family member is actually stalking our client and we want to help. Is there anything we can do to assist?
So smart.
To assist, yeah. Can we connect with a mental health expert?
Right.
Did you know that your family member was suffering in this way? We could go over there with you to talk. There's all these very humane things that actually work, and that's the thing. If threatening their kneecaps worked, I'm guessing they would do that.
Sure.
Because they have the power to do that. But that isn't what actually works. So what works is a holistic wraparound approach, which is to get, the person into a better place so that they don't have an impulse to do this.
That
And it's just
makes
so
much
interesting.
sense.
The more and more I learn from experts who actually work with people who have criminal behavior, problematic behavior, 99.9% of the time, this is the thing, like when we were talking about the pedophilia and we're talking about, I was talking with an expert who treats people who have been convicted of sexually abusing children. And she was saying 100% of the time of the people that she works with, the treatment is not to chastise them it was about trying to get their life in order, trying to help them attach, because often their attachments have never gone well. There's a lot of trauma in their history. And when they actually get the comprehensive help that they need and they have a life that is conducive to general human needs, there is no impulse to abuse children, which is just completely counter to the way you hear people talk. It's about punishment and 3 strikes you're out and these people need to be killed and the death penalty and stuff. And it's just, anyway. So to you, Eve, I would say, obviously you can't afford that because I don't think, unless you're Bill Gates level of, but there are experts online who are perhaps affordable, so I'd do that. Also, there's a lot of different general advice that I would give, but you would want to tailor it to yourself. And again, I would talk with an expert. But yes, cutting off communication is often the key, because one of the things that I always thought before I would have clients along these lines and have more experience was that, well, if I just tell them, hey, I don't want to interact with you. You were a nice guy. We had a date, but could you just lay off a little?
Yeah.
I always just assume and trust that people will react the way I would, which would be to be like, oh my God, I'm so sorry.
Right.
But there are people who distort, or for whatever reason, they just don't hear you, particularly if you're a woman. And so
they might get angry about that.
Yeah. Or it's just a way in. They might not even consciously understand what their goal is. They might actually unconsciously only have the goal of just any kind of contact with you, even if that means scaring you.
And media for decades has shown people that, they have to actually, no doesn't mean no, right? Like, no. Of course the girl's going to say no. You have to keep at it, man.
Right.
You have to just keep going and do crazy things.
Yeah. Get the boombox, put it above your head.
Yeah.
Also, you might want to limit your online activity, because if you are posting things on Facebook or Instagram,
that makes it easier to stalk.
Yeah, and it's an attractive nuisance, you could argue. I mean, of course, you have the right to post things online, but this is what we call the gray rock approach to these kinds of individuals, that the more you can turn yourself into a gray rock, the less the targeting individual will target you, because there's nothing to target.
Interesting.
If you interact with them, say you have to work with the person, the more bland you are, the less reactive, the more just kind of blank you are. Like you're not angry, you're not happy, you're not scared.
Right.
You're just like nothing. Then often it will result in the targeting individual just stop being interested in you, because there's just there's nothing to grab onto, So, because sometimes people will attack, they'll attack. They'll go like, they'll retaliate, right? They'll post something on Instagram going like, this guy's stalking me. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I'm saying like, what that might be doing inadvertently is actually causing the targeting stalker to intensify their vision of you in your mind, in their mind. You know what I mean? Because it causes an emotional reaction, and now they're although it's justice to do so, to them it's just more fuel for the fire. And what you're trying to do is you're just trying to get them to not pay attention to you. You know. Also, you want to be careful about your accounts, both bank accounts and other kinds of things. Also, I would alert everyone around you, friends, family, particularly people at work, that you have a stalker, because stalkers will use those people to infiltrate, right? So you want to tell everyone, look, here's the guy, here's a picture, here's his name, and he is stalking me. And if he ever reaches out to you, don't reply and tell me. Don't reply is the thing. And watch out for scams, because it could be him.
Dude, I never thought of that. Like someone reaching out to someone, you know, like, hey, I'm a friend of Berto's. I just blah, blah, blah. Like a lot of people might inadvertently just give up information.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then boom, he's at your door. I would have a safety plan. Like if he shows up at your door, which it happens a lot, to have a step-by-step plan of what you're supposed to do. Because if you just react in the moment, you might do something that would not be great. You might even, in a panic, let him into the house. Like there should be a protocol that you follow, you know, a way to get out of the house, or who you call, or making sure your door is properly secured, that kind of thing. Also, another thing, again, and I'm not saying you should do this, but it's one thing that you might find an expert might tell you as an individual, is that you want to potentially tell him, I've told everyone that I know that you are stalking me, or that you're bothering me or something. And I've also called the authorities and given them your name. And I've told everyone around that you are scaring me and you're not listening to me when I'm telling you to stop contacting me. So I just want you to know that. When you do that to a stalker, a lot of the time that will, in addition to a lot of other things that you do, it'll shut it down, because for them, they know in that moment that they can't isolate you, that you're not alone. You know, they want you to be isolated. They want you to not have any power. And when you tell them, I have a whole crowd of people that are behind me and ready to get you if anything happens to me, or if I were to call them, then for a lot of stalkers, that'll cool their jets. Not all the time, though. I mean, some people, there's just really almost nothing you can do to get rid of them. And I know some of the listeners have been stalked or are currently being stalked, and they can attest to that. And I can say for myself, you know, I have and had stalkers as well, and it's not pleasant, obviously. And, you know, it's an impossible situation, because you want to be able to do something. Yeah. Because, you know, you want to be able to call the authorities. Like, I think this person might try to kill me, or will make up lies about me online. You know, because you see all the movies and the procedurals, and there's always like someone that will help you. Yeah. But the law is not there to help you in a situation like that. No. Generally speaking, they're just like, well, has he broken any law? Right. Like, well, not yet, but he's, you know, he is in a classic scenario where he's might. Plus, I'm not asking for you to lock him up. I'm just saying, isn't there anything we can do to stop someone from like showing up across the street from my work? You're like, no, it's a free country. He can drive past.
Isn't it weird how like both the medical establishment and the law enforcement in this country, at least, is definitely only set up to do post-mortems. Not prevention or actually helping humans with the things that they're actually concerned about. Like, if something disastrous happens, then we'll look into it.
Maybe, you know, and the thing is, like,
we're busy.
Yeah. If you have powerful friends and you seem like you live in a nice neighborhood, then maybe the police will. Anyway. All right, let's take a break. When we get back, let's actually power through these emails. Berto, what do you say?
Let's do it.
All right, we're back from the break. Berto, let's do an OPP. What do you say?
OPP.
These people became patrons 2 or 3 years ago. We have MP from God knows where. We have Max from Ogden, Utah. We have Kaylin from Edmonton, Alberta. Nice. Anna from God knows where. May from South Carolina. Emily from St. Paul, Minnesota. Kate from God knows where. Carol from God knows where. Annual patron Melissa from Washington, D.C. Upper tier patron Maria from Lisbon, Portugal.
Portugal.
We have a lot of people from Lisbon.
Really? I have a good friend in Portugal.
Upper tier patron Confused from Albany, New York. We have Anna from God knows where. Claire from Pittsburgh. Upper tier patron Claire. Janet from Indiana. Buck from God knows where. Serena from God knows where. Serena from Falls City, Washington. Which is right
Falls City, yes.
Adjacent to where I grew up in Sammamish. I would ride my bike down the hill to Falls City.
I lived on the way to Falls City at one point.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
On that road in Redmond?
The Falls City Falls City Road, yeah.
Yeah. Maria from Toronto, Sydney from annual patron Sydney from Reno, Nevada. The biggest, smallest city in the smallest, biggest city in the world or something.
Really?
Isabella from Salt Lake City, Utah. Amy from God knows where. Luzu from Reseda, California. Stina from Sweden. Elia from London. Kendra and Emma from God knows where. Thank you for becoming a patron
London.
and staying a patron. Yeah, me too.
You know, I had a roommate from Pittsburgh when I was in college. In our fourth year, when I lived with Eric, Shun, Dave, Dave moved out halfway through the year, and we got Bob from Pittsburgh. Yeah, he was a bike rider. He was a cool guy.
Good story.
Well, it was a cool story until I walked in on him showering, and that got awkward.
What do you mean?
So
you can't hear when a shower is on?
No, it wasn't that. It was sometimes my girlfriend would stay over, and I thought it was her in the shower. So I literally walked in and opened the curtain.
Oh, my God.
And it was Bob. And he was like, what the hell? And then he actually was telling Eric, and he's like, there's something wrong with that guy. Why would he open the curtain on me like that?
Well, really? I mean, that you wouldn't know for sure before you did that.
No, but honestly, I thought it was my girlfriend.
It's like Psycho.
Yeah.
It's like Colombian Psycho.
Yeah.
Anonymous patron, she says, hey, Kirk and Berto, I'm about to move to a new state and wondered if either of you had advice on making friends and not coming across as socially awkward. I'm often okay with meeting new people, maybe in a superficial way, but the more we hang out, the less I feel I'm able to hold their interest and they drift away. What do you think, Berto?
So I moved big moves in my life when I was younger. The biggest one was the last one when I was 15. Since then, I've been in the area. But, you know, making friends in general is something that I think doesn't come easy for everyone. You know, it's intimidating. For me, I don't know how it would be nowadays. Like, if I moved to a new area, I'm not sure how I would deal with it. When I was younger, I just kind of didn't think about it. But
at the very least, shyness or self-esteem about being interesting wouldn't be a problem for you, right?
Maybe. I don't know. Like I said, at this age, well, yeah, probably you're right. But I could see...
But it'd be weird, you know, I think even for you to like start from scratch.
Yeah,
like,
well, actually, and it was hard. Like
who do you approach? Like,
that's right.
How do you approach someone from out of the blue?
In fact, like when I moved here, and
because all of our friends, you know, you and me are all like kind of natural friends that we had to cultivate, of course.
Right,
there's
but
a whole
it just kind of happened.
But it wasn't like you just approached someone and said, hey, let's be friends, you know?
I mean, like if I think about it, when I started in high school, you know, it is one of those situations. You're starting from scratch.
Yeah.
And I had two little things that worked in my favor. One of my best friends, Ron, he was a neighbor like down the street. And he drove past my house one day, and I was outside in these awkward shorts playing golf on my grass, and he just burst out laughing. And then it turns out we were in the same school bus, and we became friends, right? And then my other friend, Ty, he was in my church youth group, and we started talking about music. And then like the next week, I was at lunch sitting with my two awkward friends that I had made. And Ty comes over and he's like, hey, do you want to come sit with us on our table and talk about music?
Wait. So your two transition friends you just ditched?
I am sad to report that I had two transition. I wouldn't call them friends, but they were, you know, like I had made.
So these are the two guys who probably have a hard time meeting people anyway.
Yeah.
And they were like, oh, there's a new guy.
Yeah.
He can hang out with us because he doesn't know any better.
Exactly. But I will say my lunches with them were very boring. And then so then this guy,
can I tell a side story on this? So I grew up with the same kids my entire life. I lived in the same neighborhood, and so I knew all the kids in my, you know, the 5 or 10 square miles very well because I'd known them since kindergarten. And there were after graduating from high school, so I'm going to my 10-year reunion. And I remember thinking, well, we should all be beyond these cliques, right? Like, who cares? Like, because in high school, it just seems so important, the stratification, who's
But 10 years later.
Yeah. And in my school back then, there was this, I don't know, you could kind of think of it like a 4-tier system. There was like the upper tier who were like the coolest of the cool. Right. And then you had like this secondary tier, which I think I was mainly solidly in. I mean, I definitely knew the upper tier, but I didn't hang out with them very often. And then there was like...
You had one leg in there.
Yeah. And I knew them well, and I was often voted into certain, if they were like homecoming king, every year I was always voted in because I was like a sweet but somewhat popular guy. I guess it was the non-threatening or something. And so anyway, and then the third tier I would call like the kind of invisible tier, where it was just a bunch of non-nerd, non-popular. Right. And then there's this bottom tier that were like clearly the nerds,
And when you say nerds, do you mean actually like the very good at school people, or actually very socially awkward?
Just socially awkward.
Just socially awkward. Yeah.
Most of them actually weren't very good at school. The kids who were actually good at school were at the very least in that third tier, but often they were in the first and second tier. Yeah. Like the top students in our class were, some of the most popular people. Anyway, so. And maybe that's just my school, but anyway, so I go to the 10-year reunion, and I'm thinking, at the very least, that bottom tier was stupid. Why would we reject those people? I'm sure they're awesome people, right? I mean, people are great. Every human is great. So I go to the 10-year reunion, and because I always organize all of our reunions. I don't know why I'm masochistic in that way, but I've organized all of our high school reunions, and so I'm working the room, I'm going to every different, clique, because the cliques still would congregate together.
They're still there.
And so I'm going to everyone, and I see those two guys, in that very low level. Yeah. And two of that super nerd class. And so I went up to them and was like, "Oh my God, hey, how's it going?" And I'm thinking, I'm going to integrate. I'm going to break the walls. I'm going to tear down this system. I'm going to get these two people who are probably great guys. I'm going to get them over there with the popular people, and we can all realize that we're all just human beings and everything's great. Yeah. About 7 minutes into desperately trying to have a conversation with these two guys, it was like, it wasn't just difficult, it was impossible. There was
nothing to latch onto.
It was almost like they were being hostile, you know. And before people have questions, like, I knew these guys so well because, like I said, I grew up in the same neighborhood. We did have a lot in common, and there were moments when, like, I remember one of them, I think I invited to some of my birthday parties back in the day. You have these sort of friends that kind of come in, and I played sports with these. There were times in my life when I knew both of these guys really, really well. Yeah. So it wasn't like I was to them some stranger, popular guy who comes over and is just annoying them. Like, we were friends, I thought, but so it was at that moment when I was like, oh, it was completely mind blowing, because in the movies, the nerds are always cool. They're always great.
There's a big turnaround.
Yeah, they're just underappreciated, or they like Dungeons and Dragons or something. But in this moment, I was like, oh, there's like something different about these people. You know what I mean? Like, and I don't know what that is.
So this is very interesting, because that was the same experience I was having in that situation
with those two guys.
I don't remember how. It was probably like the first day at lunch. I looked around and I'm like, oh, I'll just sit here, and we started talking, and they were very awkward.
Yeah, and again, it's not just because, like, I love awkward. You're awkward.
Well, I have awkward friends, and I am awkward. Yeah. Well, not socially awkward, but like,
the sort of awkwardness that I experienced, and I think you did too, it's almost like hostile awkwardness. It's like awkwardness that you can't work with, and it doesn't feel good, right?
Right. Like where I would be trying to talk about things, and really, like, there wasn't much to talk about.
Yeah.
And so,
like, it's like they didn't want to try at all to make things go smoother.
Right. And so I had been with them for about a week. at that point. And then this guy Ty basically saved me, swooped me off my feet, and took me to the promised table land.
When they make your biopic, that scene where Ron drives by and laughs at you, if I saw that in a movie, I'd be like, well, that's probably a condensed thing. But to hear you say that, because if any of y'all knew Ron, you would know that's like just the perfect introduction.
Yes.
That he doesn't even know you.
Nope.
He sees you in shorts and he stops to humiliate you.
Well, no, he's in the back seat of the car. His parents are driving. He makes sure I'm looking at him through the window and he's pointing at me and just cracking up.
And then you become best friends.
Yes, and then we could become best friends.
Yeah. So that's just so funny.
Yeah. In fact, in the bus, he was, you know how in the bus the back seat was the cool seat, right? So he was in the back seat with this guy, Steve Fermo. Steve Fermo was this huge, gigantic Italian dude. And I came in, and at first in the bus, I would sit like in the middle. And then after I met Ron, he's like, hey, come back to the back. And then but they were both one grade higher than me. So I was like a little bit like introduced, like, okay, I'm the new guy, And then it was great. But yeah, and he was like, what the hell were you wearing the other day? I drove by your house. You were like wearing these pink shorts or something. I was like, yeah, I don't know. It's just, and that was it. It was the beginning of a beautiful friendship.
What I will say, anonymous patron, so you're saying anonymous patron for yourself, that when you meet people, you're like, I'm okay with meeting people, but you say the more you hang out with people, the less you feel you're able to hold their interest, and then people would drift away from you. Okay, so I don't know what the situation is, but I'm going to throw out a number of possible factors that I can think of off the top of my head. One is that you do have social anxiety, which can not only cause you to pull away from people prematurely or maybe be a bit clammed up when you're talking to people, but also you can push people away because people can interpret social anxiety as people being stuck up. It's almost universal that when people are quiet, people almost always assume that the person is stuck up, that they think of themselves as being superior. Yeah. When 99% of the time, the person, even if they're like a famous person and relative to you, if they're being quiet, in all likelihood, they're just scared. And, so there's that. So social anxiety could be an issue. Another is there could be some schemas involved that are causing you to interpret things in a particular way, meaning that you assume, because you're saying that the more you hang out with people, the less you feel you're able to hold their interest, and then they drift away. I'm guessing you don't know that you're not holding their interest and that they're drifting away because you're not interesting. They think you're not interesting. What you're observing is you meet people, you feel comfortable, you're hoping that the relationship builds into something. It doesn't, and then somehow you wake up one day and you're like, oh, I guess that person isn't my friend anymore because we haven't talked in a long time. And then you conclude from that it's because they're drifting away from you because you're not interesting. Then that could be a schema thing. Also, another thing is lack of experience. If you don't have a lot of experience meeting people and trying to be interesting, I guess, or trying to be a good friend, then I think that can be a problem, right? Also, you could be holding back somehow based on your ideas of yourself. I don't know. Also, that some people assume that they need to listen more. Like some people in social interactions, they will listen a lot. And that's great to listen, but if you don't open up and share, statistics actually, research shows that people won't, like you, they won't feel comfortable with you.
Okay.
So if you're trying to make friends, you got to talk.
Yeah.
You got to say shit. You got to share things. You got to be open. You got to express your fucking self,
right?
Because then people have something to grab onto, and they trust you more. They like you more. You provide interest to them, even if you don't think you're very interesting. Like just say anything that's in your heart.
And it's a balance because I have pushed people away from being too expressive, too talkative, too on my sleeves. I remember one time many years ago, we went to a volleyball game at UW with a guy I knew from high school and his fiance or wife or something. And then it's a fine game and stuff. I remember reflecting on the drive back because they were driving us back. I remember I was so talkative. So at the end of the night, I felt I thought, man, did I overdo it? Like, I think maybe I was too much, and I haven't seen those people since.
Yeah.
So I feel like,
well, again, you're drawing a conclusion.
I'm drawing a conclusion, but I do remember thinking to myself, wow, I did all the talking.
Yeah, certainly I can name situations where someone so it's not talking a lot. It's talking a lot without listening.
Sure.
It's talking a lot without reading the room.
Right.
That maybe you should stop talking so that other people can also can know, change the subject or something. And certainly, yeah, there's a lot of people in this world who talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk, and they never stop to ask you a question. I would like to think that I'm in that middle group where I love to talk, but I also love to ask questions.
Yeah.
I love to listen. I'm interested in what other people think and their experiences. So I will talk and talk and talk and talk, but I'm also really interested in what you have to say, and I'll be trying to get you to say things to me. But some people equate, or they'll walk away from the whole kind of experience going like, you should never talk, or you should talk, or you should talk as little as possible. And it's just like, no, it's not that. It's that you should be talking and you should be listening, both intensely and often. Also, you might have some traumas around sharing Anonymous Patron. I don't know. You could have low self-esteem that's leading to this, which could affect your interpretation, but also when you're interacting with people, the low self-esteem could come across as not low self-esteem, but actually that you don't care about what other people think. Like, one of the things that shy people, social anxious people will do is they will, because they're so scared, they will not have a lot of eye contact. And when they do that, and of course there are other reasons why people don't have eye contact, but one of the ways that you'll interpret that, if you're getting that from someone, particularly if you don't know them that well, is it just looks like the person isn't interested in you at all.
Right.
Like, they don't want to talk to you. They're not interested in interacting with you. They're just putting up with you.
Yeah.
So, eye contact is important. Also, it's possible that you might be approaching the wrong people and have approached the wrong people. Maybe you're not compatible, or they're the sort of people that just aren't looking for friends or something. I don't know.
Look, there are so many people. So take it from someone who is an extrovert, who has no problem talking to people. But there are so many people that I can be extremely friends with at a club or at a party and things like that I'll never hang out with as like a friend, let's say. And it's nothing they're doing, nothing I'm doing. It's just like, we don't cross that boundary. We don't necessarily see what the next step might or might not be. We just, like, I might see them at a thing and be like, oh my God, it's great to see you, blah, blah. And that's it. Yeah. And that happens to me all the time. Mm-hmm. Part of it is you don't only have so many hours in the day. You can't have a billion friends that you're actively always doing stuff with.
Well, it's also compatibility. Yeah. I debate this in my own mind, because when I think about my own friends and the relationships that have lasted and deepened, my first thought is, well, it's because we are extremely compatible in a variety of ways.
Sure.
That kept us together, that attracted us, that give us enough reason to put up with each other's bullshit. But then on the other hand, I'm like, well, but it's not like dating where I systematically thought about it. And maybe I did a little bit, but not a lot.
No.
I think it's possible a lot of friends are kind of circumstantial,
Sure.
and are just convenient. The people that sat next to you at lunch, the first people you met at school that one day.
Yeah.
Because I can think of some friends that I have consciously decided that I just am not going to hang out with as much anymore because I have figured out that compatibility is not as strong,
Sure.
And so, with them, if I didn't have other friends that I could rely on, I think that question wouldn't even arise for me. As my life gets more complicated, I'm just like, I have to organize my time a little bit better. And so it was kind of a part of that. So I guess along those lines, everyone just think about doing your best to cultivate, because it takes a lifetime. That's the other thing, Anonymous Patron, is that there's this notion that you just go to a town, you meet people, and you have friends. But true friends, deep, dependable, loyal, dedicated, good friends, are things that can literally take 40 years to develop. At least 10 years.
Yep.
And
you certainly cannot predict where it's going to be.
Yeah. So you have to go on a campaign, at least a weekly campaign of, okay, what am I doing to not only deepen my friendships if I don't have them, but to sustain them?
Yeah.
What am I doing? It's the same way that a marriage takes work, right? Like you could go for a month with a lot of distance, and at some point you got to check in with yourself and the relationship and say, like, are we drifting? How are we doing?
Yeah.
And you have to pay attention, because you might think, oh, I think we need to hang out a little bit more, or we need to roll around or something together. And so it's important to pay attention. And with friends, it's the same thing, I guess, minus the rolling around, depending on your sort of relationships. But the other possible factor, anonymous patron, is that, and this is a very common thing, is that you might not be initiating meetups as often as you should be. I've talked about this a lot, so I won't bore people, but I discovered, I don't know, maybe 10, 20 years ago, that if I didn't initiate, other people probably won't, and thus nothing ever will happen, and I will have no friends. So at some point, I just said, like, it doesn't feel great to be that person, but it's kind of a matter of interpretation, because if I interpret it the common way, I'd be saying, well, obviously no one wants to hang out with me, and I'm just begging people and kind of forcing them to be my friends or something. But I don't think that's true. I think what the reality is that literally everyone is bad about friendship, even though they desperately want it.
Right.
And everyone is insecure, and so they worry about initiating. And so because I have enough confidence and I have enough, secure attachment in my life, I'll be the one to initiate. Yeah. It's like, this isn't exactly a great analogy, but when I interact with kids, I don't wait for the kids to approach me. Right. Like if it's a Christmas party or something, I'll walk up to the kids and say, do you want to color in a coloring book, or do you want to play with my Star Wars Legos or something, and they always are like, yes, usually, they're just like, oh my God, that sounds great. And so I know that the kids are shy and it's not their place. And in the same way, I think most people are just, they're overworked or they're shy. I think most of it is shyness, honestly. And when I initiate things, especially with good friendships like yourself, I always get, at the very least, it's like, oh my God, I can't, but let's do it another time, Yeah. And so me keeping that ball rolling has been a major fuel in all of my friendships, that if I didn't do, I don't think I would have any friends.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it takes people like you that are the organizers. The other thing is it always builds on little things. Like, as an example, sure, I met Ron like almost right away, but I actually met a lot of other people too. So why did Ron and I stick? Well, it's because be like, hey, do you want to do this one activity? And then if that activity is something I actually do want to do, and then we do it, and then we have fun, that builds a little bit of a foundation.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying, the cultivation.
So it's like, hey, do you want to go see, like, we literally bought, the first Christmas we knew each other, we got each other tickets to the Phantom of the Opera, and we went and saw it. And that was like a really big bonding thing. It's like, and we both loved it. And it was like, oh, it's great. We went and saw The Cure, We went and saw, and these things build. And it's even the little things, not even just the big events, but also
because, to put a fine point on it, whoever initiated going to The Cure, one of the other person could have been like, I don't feel like it, right. Or it's too much money, or I don't know. Sounds kind of scary. I don't know.
Yep.
And you don't have to go to concerts, but there's always a reason to not do things.
That's right.
And if you default in that direction, then you'll never have any friends.
That's right.
In my view.
And then there's also the little things, just like the conversations you have, and hey, let's go to the mall and play Street Fighter. Sure. And then you do, and then you talk about it, and then girls or whatever, those little things just build on each other. But they don't build with everyone. That's the key. Like, some people, they don't build because, as an example, someone might have invited me to go play hockey, and I didn't really care. I'm like, no. So then that didn't build that little bit of a
well, also, a big factor in friendships is shared activities.
Yeah.
And so having friends who want to do those things, and maybe even almost kind of manufacturing an interest in it. Because, like, say you move to Canada and no one played Street Fighter and everyone played hockey, you probably would at least consider, maybe I should actually play hockey.
Sure.
Maybe
I might have to.
maybe flexibility
right.
around that. Another thing that I see people doing that will shoot them in the foot socially is they don't ask questions. They talk and listen, but they don't express interest through questions. And so if you can, you want to just be naturally curious, and thus natural questions will come out of your face. But if you can't, then you want to try to figure out, well, what question would keep this conversation going, It's a wonderful way to get conversations going, to ask someone an open-ended question that it will actually provoke them to, because people like talking about themselves. So, what's your favorite movie or something?
So that, as an example, that always was not natural for me, because I was always very self-involved and very narcissistic. And so when I would meet new people, I generally wouldn't ask them questions. And, I think that probably turned off a whole bunch of people that I wasn't even aware I was turning off, right? The ones that I stuck with, it's because we were probably interested in the same thing. So we would naturally talk about it, like music or whatever, but not because I was like, well, tell me about your family, or how is this thing? That took me a long time to develop and think, well, maybe the world's not just about me. Maybe I need to have a little interest in the other people. Was not a natural thing.
All right. Well, I wasn't listening to you that entire time. Just joking. Just joking. Let's take a break and we get back. More emails. What do you say, Berto?
Let's do it.
So, Berto, if you were in high school and you were going to go over to the other table to try to become their friend, you're the new kid in school, and you're also going to try to convince them to become a patron of the podcast, what would that sound like?
Hey guys, how's it going? Oh my gosh, I'm new to this school. I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. It looks like I'm interrupting, but here, can I sit here? Oh, someone's sitting. No, I won't be long. I just want to tell you guys, I'm so excited because I saw that you were looking at this album cover, and that's not a band I'm into, but I totally see how you guys could be into it because you look a little nerdy. Oh, you're not nerds. Okay, that's cool. But oh wait, no. Listen. I am not trying to spit in your face right now. I'm just excited, and I'm excited to be here. You know what? What if I told you I have a special opportunity? I'm not only the new kid in the school, I have the answer to how to be cool at this school. You don't believe me, I can tell, but if you become a patron of the Psychology in Seattle... Wait, why are you shoving me? Why are you kicking me out? Why are you beating me up? Why is everyone laughing at me while I'm on the ground? Ah!
I'm both horrified and saddened by that story. Listener Lee from Brooklyn, he says, I'm an MSW student, Master's Social Work student, and a huge fan. I was wondering if you've ever experienced a painful friend breakup. I've had a few painful friend breakups myself, and a lot of people in my life say that they have more trouble coping with friend breakups than a romantic breakup. I was wondering if you had any insight into friend breakups. Why are they so hard to cope with? Berto, what do you think?
Wow, I've had friend breakups, and so there's one in particular I've talked about in the past, where it's now been 2019, 3 years, and I still have dreams. I'll have a dream where we are back together, so to speak. We're doing something, and in the dream, it's really interesting because never in the dream are we actually talking, apologizing or talking about it or anything. We're just past that point and we're interacting, but there's always something a little awkward or different or whatever. But these things keep happening, and it shows that it's in my subconscious, and I feel pain. It's not the kind of thing where I feel like I want to apologize and try, because I feel like, it was just a situation where the same thing had happened before, and this time I'm I was done with it, and I'm pretty sure they're done with it. But it hurts. So I totally understand that feeling, it's like a real breakup. I had another one many years ago.
Did you feel like that your grieving process was able to run naturally?
No, not really, because it was so sudden, and then what do you do? What do you do about it? I can talk to people about it. But
because your dreams could indicate a lack of processing.
Yeah, I agree. I don't feel like it was.
Yeah.
There's no closure or processing about it.
Yeah. So what I would say, listener Lee, is similar to what Berto's getting at, which is that in our culture, not only do we shame emotions in general, but we shame grief in particular.
Yeah.
And we particularly shame grief that lasts longer than a couple days, which of course it usually does, far longer, perhaps the rest of our life. But we particularly shame certain kinds of losses. We actually call this, oh my God, I forgot the word. There's a term for this in the grief literature. Oh my God.
Like when you lose someone?
No, it's disenfranchised grief is what it's called.
Okay.
I'm so glad I remember. There's a whole book on this. But it's a phenomenon in our culture that of all the things that we legitimately grieve about significantly, there are very few losses that other people and ourselves will validate. The loss of a spouse, the death of a spouse, the death of a parent, death of a kid. But pretty much anything outside that, which is arguably most of the losses in our life, are not valued by society, by friends, by ourselves. And friends are one of, loss of a pet, miscarriages are a massive loss that are often not recognized. Loss of a job, loss of a 1 year long romantic relationship, and loss of a friend. And so not only do
breakups are stigmatized. Like, you're supposed to get up off your butt, get moving.
Yeah.
Come on, there's other fish in the sea.
Yeah. Why are you living in the past? Why are you dwelling on it? And the amount of grief that people go through is tremendous. It can last the rest of our life, as I said. And the grief process is such that for the vast majority of people, they need to think about it, they need to talk about it, they need to experience it, they need to share, they need to reminisce, they need to mull over things, they need to ask questions, they need to get support, they need to have other people share their experiences with grief. For example, for you, with your friend breakup, that was a big deal. There's, it wouldn't be unusual that literally for 25 years, you periodically, it comes up in your head and you just start talking about it. Whether you talk about it with me or your wife or other people, you could literally have the same things that you say, you know, like you might say, oh my God, I just thought about him again. And I just can't believe, and to your wife or to other people, they might recognize that it's like the 15th time they've heard you say,
like, dude, you're stuck on this. Why are you?
But it could literally be the same paragraph that you say every time, but that's what we do when we're going through grief. Right. Yeah. And to recognize that, not only for other people to validate it, but for ourselves to recognize that that's what we need to do. Yeah, it's a huge problem. Disenfranchised grief is well known, and there doesn't seem to be any adjustment along those lines. So, yeah. Now, you're asking why are they so hard to cope with? Well, I would just say they're inherently hard to cope with, and the question could reflect that notion of just like, well, why are we struggling with this? And what I would say is, of course you're struggling with it because it's a massive freaking loss, man. I mean, a loss of a friend, loss of a good friend. And not only that, but, I guess if you think about it, usually when you lose a friend, if they're alive, it's not because you broke up amicably, you know? Because usually, say someone moves to another country or something, you still stay in touch. You still consider them to be friends. So usually when we lose a friendship, it's because there was a big blow up.
Oh, case in point, when I moved from Colombia, I left some extremely good friends down there. When I saw them 6 years later, it was as if no time had passed. We were just as thick, and we still are. They're still friends with me. When I go down there, I see them. Yeah. And I've never felt that feeling of grief because we're still friends.
Well, I'm guessing you felt grief when you first moved up here, not because you lost friends, but because you lost your community and your language and your culture and your people and your family that were
That's a whole other horse of many different colors in which I didn't know I had grief until many years later. And but absolutely there was grief. I just didn't know it.
So there was a loss.
There was a loss, but it
not
wasn't
a loss
the same kind of thing.
Of the core friendship.
No. Yeah. Especially because, as you're saying, when you lose a friend because of a disagreement, but look, your reality of who you are, your image of yourself, your reality of your memories and things are not just inside of you. It's what you do, who you spend time with, what activities, all these things. So if there's someone you spent a lot of time with and you talked with a lot and you interacted with a lot and you went through so many specific memories with, and all of a sudden they're not in your life, because they don't want to be.
Yeah, they
because
hate you.
You don't want to.
Like they hate you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's traumatic.
Or they did something so bad that you
right.
that you
That's
hate.
traumatic.
Yeah, yeah. And for the record, Berto, you and I basically had like at least one. Well, I guess I would say just one friend breakup if I think about it.
Yes.
But we were still a part of each other's lives because of the podcast. Like, you wonder if we would have ever been friends after that if we didn't have to interact, because we consider the podcast, even though we were losing money at the time, or I was anyway.
Well, it is a risk, because even if we wouldn't have meant to, you could imagine you accidentally drift apart and just don't interact.
Yeah, and maybe if we saw each other bumping, we'd be totally nice, but we wouldn't have each other as a routine. So it is interesting. But I do think that I knew enough then to know that, I don't know, when we had the breakup that we did, it just felt like it wasn't definitive breakup. It wasn't so bad that we stopped. I just remember thinking, I think I just need to scale back from him a little bit. But I wonder how long that lasted, because in my head it was for a long time, but it might have.
It wasn't actually as long as we think it is, and also
it might have just been for a few months. But it was so weird because we saw each other socially so much at the time that a few months of only seeing each other once a week, for example, would have been quite a difference.
But there was also this dynamic, which is that I wasn't self-aware enough yet to both my involvement in it as well as your reaction to it. So to me, I wasn't even as aware that we were not in the same terms. It's just that what I kept feeling, I was like, why does it feel like Kirk and I are not as close?
Yeah.
I think in this case, because I would have eventually started like thinking, oh, maybe I need to think through this a little bit more. I think I probably would have reached out anyways. Whereas, like in the current example I was talking about, I feel aggrieved enough, or I feel like there's enough reason for me not to reach out.
Yeah,
So
I mean, we've had perhaps bigger fights after that point.
Yeah,
because of your self-awareness, and I guess because of the depth of our friendship, we didn't even come close to quote unquote breaking up. Right. All right, another email, anonymous patron. So some of these emails go back a long ways because they've been in the document for a long time, and this email should reflect that. So anonymous patron, she says, I'm from Toronto and 33 years old. I absolutely loved Turning Red. The cartoon that we did an episode about, like, I don't know, how long ago, like a year ago or something?
Was it that? Yeah, it might have been actually.
The characters matched up almost exactly to how old I was in 2003 in Toronto.
Oh my God.
And I agree with Berto. So in that episode, you and I were debating one of the points of the movie. The main plot line of Turning Red is you have this tween who is emerging into puberty,
right,
and is starting to want to spread her wings a little bit more. She grew up, she has a Chinese mother. Is it Chinese mother?
Yeah,
Chinese Canadian family, and she, as a Chinese a Canadian kid, is really trying hard to be in school. And as an Asian person, I can totally relate to this. Blah blah blah. And so she always follows her mom's advice and never pushes back, and is a very good girl. And the mom is very protective, overly protective. But at a certain point, she gets to this age where she, coincides with puberty, and you could say it might be induced by puberty or something, but she wants to have more freedom. She wants to go to a concert. She wants to have a crush on a boy or something. Right. She wants to spend time away with her friends and not always be under the watchful eye of her mom.
Right. She wants to panda out.
Yeah, and she wants to maybe dress the way a little bit more with freedom. She doesn't want to go completely off the deep end. She still is interested in school, and she still wants to be a good person, but she doesn't want to just have her life completely under the watchful eye of the mom, completely within the home, completely within the mom's world, And so,
which by the way, it's individuation, right? Like, because you see that, like, before that, she's basically just like a little shadow of her mommy.
Yeah.
And so, like, she feels like, well, I what about me? Like, I need to I need to become myself.
Yeah. And so it's a normal, well-known, understood phase, at the very least in Western culture. I mean, it's hard to know like what we are naturally, so to speak, but clearly in Western culture, it's a big deal. I'm guessing it, to lesser extent from what I understand in East Asian countries, it's less so this way, but to some extent also this way. But she is raised in Canada, which is a Western country, so she has these, more at least infused Western notions of individuation and being her own person and having that freedom. And so it's a culture clash. It's a age-old story of a child who wants to break free. It's a story of puberty, and she's realizing things about herself as the story is going through. Like, oh my God, like yesterday when I would see a boy like that, I would hate him, but now I'm repeatedly drawing pictures of him without his shirt off. What am I doing? Like, what is going on in my body and my mind, And, it's this hilarious scene when she's under the
bed drying furiously.
Yeah. And and of course, Berto, as men, we can't relate to it,
Right.
Because that was the whole criticism, was just like, how are we supposed to relate to a Canadian Chinese girl? Like, like how come every movie has to tailor to girls? I'm just like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, this is a universal human experience, you fucking idiot, Like, I mean, just think about how insecure you would have to be to actively resist, like relating to someone that identifies differently than you,
And again, I was just talking about lack of self-awareness. I mean, times a billion, where you don't even realize that you also go through changes, and you also get moody, and you also had a whole period of discovery and a whole period of individualization. And like, no, that's not me. I can't see it. I don't relate to it.
Yeah. You've never been in a situation where your parents wanted one thing for you and you wanted another, or that you were confused about it. As we were talking about it, I think I spontaneously actually just thought, well, often in these movies they will purposely paint the parent in a bad light. It'll make the mom look like she's a crazy person for doing what she's doing. The whole movie is centered around how rigid and unfair she is. We root for the tween. All of us, including myself, are just hoping that the mom would just take a chill pill and see that it's okay that her daughter wants to go to an innocent boy band, concert with a bunch of other tweens. I mean, you could go with her, for crying out loud, and probably have a good time. Like, relax, everything's fine. She's not using crack cocaine behind the dumpster. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's normal shit that is very innocent, and you're just and she's crying and she wants to just let it go. So a lot of other things like that. And so, but what I was saying was, this is a fictional story, it's a cartoon, but in real life, it's hard to identify with that until you're in those shoes, until you are. And again, it's a universal thing. All parents have to deal with this. I mean, there are rare cases where everything just sort of smoothly transitions and there's really no kind of rubs there. And, for those people, it's just like, I don't know, everyone hates those kind of families that work just kind of randomly, because a lot of times it is kind of a random, because those parents might not necessarily be good parents. Right. Meaning that they have deficits, but it just
works out.
It just kind of works out. Like the kid just is extremely level-headed, and I don't know, there's just different rolls of the dice that you'd make when you birth a human being with various different personalities. But most of the time for parents, they will experience that change, where the kid was 10 and you were their whole life. So because the way that these movies often portray it, it's the child is the parent's whole life. So the parent is focused on the child, and the child has a more balanced point of view. But if you've ever been a parent and you've parented a 10-year-old, that sometimes it's annoying how much your 10-year-old relies on you.
Oh yeah.
For everything. For not only just sustenance and putting him to bed every night and reading him a story and paying their bills and driving them to ballet and all the stuff, but also emotionally, they want to play with you all the time.
That's right.
They don't want to play by themselves. They don't want to play with sister. They want to play with you.
Yeah.
And when you don't want to, when you're busy or you just would rather not play that stupid 10-year-old game for the 10 millionth time or watch, Turning Red the 15th time, you know what I mean? You don't do it and you feel shitty, you feel guilty. And so sometimes you're just like, can you please just leave me alone? Like individuate? Can you,
well, and so
you don't say that, but you get frustrated sometimes.
And part of your responsibility has to be, because there's going to be a lot of things where you as a parent are still thinking a 5-year-old kid who can't actually open the drawer. But 10-year-old kid is still abusing that notion.
Right.
And you want to be like, oh, yeah, here, but you got to catch yourself and be like, well, no, actually, you should open the drawer. You should do the thing. You should take the dog out.
Right.
You should do the,
so there's
do the dishes.
So not always, but there's this element of you need to individuate, at age-appropriate ways. You need to get your license when you're 16 so that I don't drive you around all the time. You need to get a job and start.
So otherwise, we're actually hurting you.
Right. Well, and also it can, for some parents, just be annoying that they are having to baby a child that has the capability. So, but the movies are often told from the kid's point of view,
right?
For I think a variety of because they're geared towards kids for one, but also I just think our culture is geared towards individuation. We're a country of individuators, of individual. We're always trying to break free. Give me freedom, and
I want to break free.
Yeah, and we don't elevate the parent side of this, because the other element of this that's present in the movie Turning Red is that you can't let a 12-year-old dictate their life.
No.
Because if you did, they would kill themselves.
Right.
They would, really horrible things would happen. Not all 12-year-olds, but many 12-year-olds are terrible decision makers.
Of course.
Many
18-year-olds are.
Yeah.
Many 25-year-olds
right.
are.
Well, particularly 18, but even at the age of 12, they start to want to stay up all night. They don't want to do their schoolwork. They don't want to go to school.
Right.
Especially if they're starting to consider using substances or go to a party with college kids there and they just think it's cool, or they want to dress in something that's extremely inappropriate for school, or
they want to listen to rock and roll.
And so you have to save them from themselves, which means not letting them individuate. There's reasons why you, as a responsible, good, loving parent, will actually tell your kid, especially if they're very interested in early individuation, you're going to say no, and you're going to be the bad guy, and you're going to be a dick.
Yep.
And there's nothing present in Turning Red that's like that, but that theme isn't usually, it's not like can you think of a movie where we elevate a parent who actually clamps down on a tween or a teenager, and tells them like, I'm not going to let you do that. And the parent walks off into the sunset and we all like clap.
I'd have to really, really think about that.
I doubt, I would venture to say, and please listeners, if you can identify a movie, please email or comment or something, because I can't think off the top of my head, obviously, and I just can't even picture that scene. And of course, I can picture...
The only thing that might be is like if the movie is not actually about the kid at all, it's just some side scene or something. But like if it's a movie where the kid is the protagonist, like I just don't see it.
Right, kid is protagonist.
Yeah.
Like I can imagine a movie where a sibling is out of control and we're supposed to not like the sibling, and the parent actually cracks down on that sibling, but never in a situation where we're supposed to purely identify with the parent and say like, oh, I'm glad that parent actually clamped down on that kid, And this notion actually is pretty destructive in our culture. When you talk to parents, generally speaking, in certain mainstream white America particularly, and it is a white American thing, I hate to say, because in the Asian community, it's not so much this way. And I'm pretty sure in the black community, it's not this way. In general, of course, it's not a monolith, but in middle class, upper class, white, liberal America, this notion that you should never tell your kid no, and that you should always be encouraging, and that kids just need freedom and everything will be fine. I'm just going to tell you that's not my philosophy of parenting. And as a professional parent, helper as a therapist, I can tell you that that is not a good guideline for all children. For some kids, it might work out, but for many kids, it won't.
In a lot of movies, the threat was like the kids being wild and the parents going to send them to military school.
Yeah.
Like Bill and Ted, isn't that in the Dead Poets Society? Isn't that like...
I mean, essentially, yeah.
There's all these things where it's like the kid is being wild and the parent needs to regulate.
Neil, the father, because Neil was in a play against the father's will.
Right.
He was pulling him out of the boarding school and setting him in a military school. Yeah.
Yeah. And then in Bill and Ted's, I think the first one or the second one, he's like, one of them was going to get sent to.
It was a classic punishment to children. The movie Taps with Timothy Dalton and Tom Cruise, I believe, is about a military school that goes rogue, if I remember. Anyway, so it all brings it to this email right here, Berto. So I agree with Humberto about challenging traditions of how mom's behaviors I agree with Humberto about challenging traditions and how mom's behaviors would be traumatizing for a child. Just chiming in here, so I'll just briefly say this, that the debate that I was getting into was that...
I remember it was at the store when she drags her over to the store to confront the clerk who she's been drawing.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God, that'd be so traumatizing.
Yeah. And I probably was saying, at least from the way I feel now, I would say yes. And from the mom's point of view, I understand where she's coming from because there's a different paradigm, particularly if it's a different culture that I don't actually understand that well. You know what I mean? Like, I understand the reaction of you and me and the little girl, because as a Westerner, I'm Japanese American, but I'm fourth generation. So there's been a lot of years of programming into the Western culture notion. And of course, my mom's ancestors have always been a part of Western culture. So so I certainly can relate, but then I have to add this question of just like, well, if the mom's operating from this other place, which might not be well suited for this new environment, but I think I might understand where the mom is coming from, because in a different culture, coming from a different set of rules in the community, it might be absolutely the best thing to do for the kid's sake to not do that, of course, but to do something along those lines of just like heavy invasion, I guess. But
that's the whole point, that same kind of culture doesn't include modern ideas of what's maybe more mentally healthy for a kid. And that means like,
well, are you saying that every kid in China, are you saying every kid in China is harmed by their cultural notion of parenting?
Oh no, what I'm suggesting is that the types of cultural norms that you don't even have to go to China, like the kind of cultural norms that I was parented with or my parents were parented with, were culturally consistent to Colombia and all that stuff. They weren't informed at all by what might be healthier for a child, for a child's brain development.
So I just want to, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I want to be specific. Are you saying that Western culture is informed and Colombian culture is not?
Well, Colombian culture is Western, but it is definitely in the 50s, 60s, probably all the way to the 80s or 90s, I don't know, was not informed.
Not educated.
Well, I don't think there was a way for it to be educated, because there wasn't even an education to be had about it.
And in the United States in the 90s, it was educated.
No.
I'm just trying to clarify exactly what you're saying.
No. Well, what I'm saying is like, it might be that culturally, let's say we need to make sure that kids aren't distracted, 12-year-olds or whatever, are not distracted by hormones and boys, because that will harm their schooling. Okay, great. That's the thing. And maybe that results in general in like the kids not being as distracted. Okay. But when it is taken to the extreme of like, and I'm going to drag the kid and embarrass them in front of their whole community, essentially, that's not informed by what might be healthy for that child.
Yeah. But to be clear, the mom, and of course, the mom should not have done that. But she was not operating from a place of trying to humiliate her daughter. She thought,
of course not.
She thought the boy was, because she did not conceive of her daughter being horny for a boy.
Well, right. Exactly.
She figured the boy must have exposed her to something. And so the boy, it must be at fault. So I'm going to, with my daughter who is a victim of something, not of something horrible, but influence or something, I'm going going to stand up for my daughter, and I'm going to go attack the monster, and I'm going to defend my daughter, and my daughter will love me even more because I'm saving her. That's what she thinks.
I think that's probably 80% of parents don't mean ill to their kids.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I mean, I don't remember it being centered around that story. I just remember what I was trying to shove down your throat ineffectively, because it's a common thing that I'm frequently thinking about, because I would run into this a lot with the parents. You know, it's sort of weird. I never thought I would get into this business along these lines, but for a good 10, 15 years of my career as a therapist, I would say about 20% of my sessions were spent analyzing, observing, and engineering and therapizing parenting.
Yeah.
And it's so involved because, not every parent wants to take advice. Yeah. Not every parent thinks that there's something wrong with their parenting. And there's so many different ways to parent, and there's so many cultural ways to parent, and every kid is different. And as a helper, as a therapist, how do I get the parents to change? Because if I just told them from my observation, this is wrong, that usually didn't work. I had to basically come at it from a unique direction with every client. With some people I could just tell them, with others I had to trick them. Others I had to get their trust. Other parents I would literally get in fights with them and I would yell at them. There were some parents that I would just be like, you're wrong. And we would just start yelling at each other essentially. And then I would just overpower them. Well, not overpower them. I would win their trust by throwing down essentially. Yeah. At the end of the session, they would go like, wow, that guy really cares. And although I don't agree with anything he said, he seems passionate, so I'll continue to work with him. It was sort of a breaking of the ice or something. It was very hard, is what I'm saying. And so one of the things that I absorbed through that experience was what these people taught me was that there are many ways to raise a happy child. And some of these ways I discovered were completely foreign to me,
Sure.
maybe in culture, but also just in approach and attitude. Also, again, every kid's different. So I had to completely dismantle my assumptions based on my cultural upbringing about what was good parenting and what was bad parenting. I still had things that were bad parenting. It's not like I said all things are good. And I still had things that I identified in certain cultures, including my own, that were bad. It's not like I just said, well, it's a culture thing, it's a Chinese thing, it's all good. No, there are a lot of shitty things about general Chinese parenting. It's hard to generalize about Chinese parenting.
But to
in the same way that there are
that,
shitty things about general American parenting.
Right. And to bolster that, for example, that mom in that movie, I wouldn't conclude, oh, she's a bad mom because of that scene, right? I would say, oh, I disagree with how she handled that. But you can't just say oh, this one thing you did means you're a bad parent. Well, unless that one thing is really disastrous evil. But look, I have an example that happened to me that I've talked about before that is very much like this. And you could analyze it from both sides. So do you remember the story about when I borrowed money from a friend to buy this very expensive piece of music gear, and then my mom found out and forced me to return it, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
What did you buy again?
So it was a sound module, a digital sound module.
And you didn't even have a controller.
I didn't have the right gear to go with it, right?
So you had a worthless, how much did it cost?
I can't remember. I think it might have been $3,000, but it might have been $1,500.
Yeah.
So what it might have been is I borrowed $750 and I had $750.
This is like 1989-ish.
It was 92.
You're in high school.
I'm in high school.
Yeah.
But here's the catch. So on the one hand, my mom did the quote unquote right thing by saying, hey, no, you're not keeping that. We are returning that. Okay, great, because that's right. I didn't have that money. I shouldn't have borrowed that money. I shouldn't have bought that thing. Correct. In retrospect, I've always said, hey, I think that was good for me because I kind of needed that. But you know what was missing? And again, I'm not faulting my mom. It's not like every parent needs to be like a super awesome therapist of their child at all times. But here's what was missing. We never had a conversation about why.
Yeah.
What was I trying to accomplish? Why did I think this was the way to accomplish it?
Yeah. What factors led to you coming to an illogical conclusion that you knew better, essentially?
Right. I was desperate for this thing.
Something was influencing the decision to sacrifice yourself.
Exactly. And so the only thing that was there was her dragging me to the store and forcing me to return and be embarrassed in front of, quote unquote, my community.
Potentially Well, I'm going to say this. I'm pretty sure that added to the problem.
It probably made me more traumatized because now I'm
for people that don't know,
embarrassed to return things.
For the next 15 years, 10 years at least, had a pretty bad spending addiction.
Yeah.
And would buy things that were way too expensive to try to prove. I mean, you could argue that 90% of the trauma happened in that moment.
No, because it's my dad too and all this. But listen, whatever the case.
But I mean, it's so directly related.
But you can look
the fact
at it,
that you had to walk in,
right,
a la Turning Red,
exactly,
and with a tear in your eye and a shake in your foot, say, "Can I need to return this? And can I get my money back?"
With
your
the implication being, oh, I see, you are a person who cannot afford what you were buying.
Well, that's what you're concluding.
I know, but that's what I'm saying. Like inside of me, the inner Berto is going,
dirty immigrant.
Dirty immigrant. You can't afford what you're buying. Yeah. And also, your delusions of becoming a musician are obviously stupid.
Yeah.
So all of it is wrapped up in that.
And your
moment.
mom's like, was she standing over your shoulder in this moment?
Of course.
Yeah. So, fast forward 5 years and you're roaming a shopping mall thinking, I can buy anything in here and no one can stop me.
No one can stop me.
And I don't even care if I want it or not. I'm just going to buy it on principle so I can prove to that fucking clerk at American Music that I can buy anything I want and my mommy can't tell me I can't.
Exactly. But it was also very telling that when I finally broke on the clothes and I took my jacket, my $3,000 jacket back, and I tried to return it with my tail between my legs, I was essentially recreating my mom taking me to the mall to do that. So it kind of cuts both ways. So in that moment, I do think that as a parent, it is right to say, listen, we actually do need to return this. However, what I would have done, like the changes would have been the conversation about why, what was my motivation, what am I trying to accomplish? Oh, so you're trying to do this thing. Well, maybe like the way I am, I might be like, well, maybe we can find someone that can help with that. Like, it sounds like you're trying to become a better musician and you think that by buying this thing, that's going to lead, but maybe not. And also, yes, let's go return this. But my goal isn't to embarrass you. My goal is to let you see that it's safe to return things.
Yeah, I mean, knowing what I know now, of course, and how would I know this as your parent at the time? No. But knowing what I know now, here's what I would have done, I think. I would have still retained the goal of like, no, we got to return this thing. It's ridiculous. Although...
And you got to return the money you borrowed.
I'm the sort of parent that actually probably wouldn't do that. So that's going to be hard for me to... So let me not go there because it'll be hard for me to genuinely come from that place. But so if I were to approach it, but I had the same feeling of like, he needs to not be doing this because if he keeps doing it, he'll be in debt, $10,000 to various different friends.
Yeah.
And could be harming Humberto because he'll have to pay it back for stuff that he might not really need. And two, it's harming other people because Berto doesn't have that fucking money. And so
right.
And this isn't a good way to live your life. Like, you can't, maybe get a credit card, but that's between you and a bank. It's not between you and a friend. I mean, $750, that's a lot of money. And I know how charismatic Berto can be. So, this isn't good. He needs to learn he can't like exploit people. I guess I would have a conversation about it. I'd be like, okay, you can keep it if you want, but can I tell you what I think about it? Because it kind of looks like you bought it on impulse, one, because you don't necessarily have all the equipment to utilize it. You literally can't even play it because you don't have a controller for it. Two, I know enough about music to know that there are much cheaper options.
Oh, this is you. Yeah, of course, not my mom.
Yeah. But so, I'm just going to throw that out there. Also, I know enough for myself that sometimes you feel like if you buy expensive stuff, you'll sound expensive. But I'm here to tell you that actually it's kind of the opposite to some extent. Like if you have great talent and great passion and great know-how, you can make the shittiest instrument sound like a Stradivarius. If you know what you're doing. If you want to be a great musician, let's work on that. But don't chase it with money.
Right.
How do you plan on paying this back? Because I would actually consider it as a parent to be a wonderful lesson on debt.
On debt, sure.
And I'd be like, okay, so I will allow you to keep it. And to tell you the truth, like if you don't follow this, I'm gonna make you return it. But I'll let you keep it if you tell me now or tomorrow your plan of paying back, because I don't know, maybe you have some way of paying them back. Maybe, maybe you have a whole plan, because, $750, that's a lot of money, but it's not impossible for you to earn that amount of money over 3 months. You could save money. So do you have a plan, that kind of, and then I guess beyond that, I would hopefully be on a campaign with you around like understanding your self-esteem around culture and around fitting in with other people. I hope I would understand like how money and trauma and the fact that I guess I always sent you gifts as a replacement for love,
But so all these things you're bringing up, which are all great, in that moment, we just had a mother who's, overworked, who doesn't in that moment have this like, wait a minute, let me stop and think for the next 10 years. It's just that you did what? Oh, no. That doesn't fly. We have to fix this. Right. And I don't care if you're embarrassed. We're doing this. Now, similarly, you have this situation with the mom going, wait, there's a guy who's stalking my girl predatorily, sexually when she's a little baby? No, there was no thinking, wait a minute, 10 years ahead. Like, no thought of that. So what I'm saying is, in both cases, there was certainly an internal protective spirit of the mother going, okay, this is not okay. I got to protect my child, and here's how we're going to fix this, right? And that is it's a good instinct to have, to protect your child and help them. The downside is it wasn't informed by all of these other aspects and things.
Yeah, it was really humiliating to her. And I mean, like, the worst possible thing she could have done, honestly. She brings these pictures, these like naked, naked pictures, and goes, these pictures, how dare you influence my daughter so that she will draw these naked pictures of you? And then all these bystanders see it. Yeah, I mean, there's the only worst thing is if she tweeted the thing, what I mean? Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, what I'll say is that the main thing I would hope that people would consider is this, including to the anonymous patron who wrote in, which I'm just one person, you're one person, anonymous patron, Berto is another one person. We all have equal authority in this topic. So not only am I experienced with the whole parenting a broad approach and also questioning my bias, but also knowing that there are times when it's okay to call out another culture for having a shitty practice. Like I experienced a number of different shitty parenting practices that were common to particular cultures, because being a therapist in Seattle, particularly when I was an in-home therapist, almost every family I worked with was from a different culture. They had their pros and cons. And that was another thing that I learned, was just like, oh, that culture does this thing really well. Because like one of I'll just talk this one jag, is that I noticed that Mexican kids and Japanese kids were very well behaved and seemingly pretty happy. Not all the time. There was high family cohesion. I mean, I'll just talk about Mexican families. High family cohesion, a lot of love, a lot of affection. Maybe it expands to a lot of Latino, Latinx families and cultures as well, but I had a lot of Mexican clients. And so what I figured was, well, the parents must be really strict. That was my Western interpretation.
Right.
Because
that's why they're well behaved.
Yeah, because I would walk in the house, because I'd be doing this on home therapy, and this was unheard of in other homes. All the kids from 3 years old to 19 would be sitting in the living room, like well-dressed.
Captain Von Trapp family.
Yeah, like ready for the therapist. Yeah, ready for the therapist. Right. But no strict ways of managing the kids. It wasn't like the parents were like, sit down. Right. I just walked in and the kids just would sit on the couch, and they were polite, and they were normal kids, so there'd be a little bit of fidgeting and stuff. But the fact that there would be like 5-year-olds, 7-year-olds just sitting there, and in other non-Mexican family homes, that was unheard of.
Chaos.
Like, you couldn't even possibly engineer that if you had 2 hours of everyone going, okay, everyone said, I mean, I'm exaggerating to some extent, but. And I would see that, now again, not every Mexican family, but it's pretty consistent. And after a while, I just like, wow, I mean, these parents must be really strict. But the more I looked into it, I discovered that it actually had nothing to do with strictness and had everything to do with modeling. That the parents were very chill. Like, they reacted in, I mean, again, not all the time, and it wasn't universal, but generally speaking, and I find this to be true about Japanese people as well. And there's pros and cons to this, but there's a general non-reactivity. And also when someone in the family reacts with some kind of loud obnoxiousness, there's not a punishment. There's a lack of attention given to it. They just they kind of slightly scowl and turn away. Like there's not a sit down. It's more like a quiet judgment.
It's almost worse. It's like the silence.
No, I actually think it's better because
no, I don't mean worse in results. I just mean like the way you feel. I'm like, oh, well, that doesn't work.
Well, I don't know. Would you rather be yelled at?
No.
I mean, I would rather have someone be quietly disapproved because a big part of being a parent is disapproving of shitty behavior. That's
right.
A fact. And so, how are you going to do that?
Right. What I'm tongue in cheek saying is that if you seek negative attention, actually, yes, the yelling would actually feel like you're still getting attention, whereas like lack of attention feels like lack of attention.
Yeah, there's that dimension.
I do see how it's more effective and less damaging.
Yeah, there's that dimension of like, kids trying to get attention, but sometimes kids are just kind of spontaneously, annoyingly rambunctious.
Yeah.
And if every time they do that, you're always like, hey, inside voices or whatever, it can create an antagonism that I think the kid internalizes. Whereas, and again, it's very complicated parenting.
Like when you were giving the speech the other day and my 7-year-old outbursted twice.
So let's talk about, not that, but let's just shift gears because I wanted to talk about this. So the final thing I'll say is that what I learned was that I learned over time how to identify with all sides because I had to.
Right.
What I learned, though, as a professor, when I would be teaching family therapists how to be a family therapist, was over time I learned that everyone comes at it with a bias either towards children or parents based on their past experience. And it was always one or the other. It was never both. And there were varying degrees of this bias, but it was always there, and I would have a way of testing for it. I would present a case. I think I wouldn't always do this, but I would present a case, and then I would, without having them discuss it, I would have them silent write who they thought was right and who they thought was wrong. I'd pick a case where it was right down the middle, and then I would have everyone share, and we would discover, wow, some people think the kid was right, some people think the mom was right, and they have compelling reasons to justify their take, and students will look across the table at their colleagues and be like, how can you possibly think that the parent was right in that situation? And so I use this as a tool of saying, like, I don't know, because it's hard to know, and I just presented a vignette, but you have to understand that in all likelihood what was just revealed was your general bias. And in order to treat families, you have to discard that bias, and it's so prevalent in our society.
Totally.
Like when you talk about, and it might even follow like political lines, but when you talk about certain things in society, there are ways of talking about it that are centered more on the non-authoritarian person. I imagine that in law enforcement, you could present a case of like a police officer and a suspect.
Yeah.
And there's people who are oriented towards suspects and people who are oriented towards police.
Sure.
That maybe is another obvious example.
Boss and employee.
Right.
And like you can have a lot of power dynamics.
Exactly. And I think that generally speaking, at least in my circle, more people are aligned and biased towards children, towards the suspect, towards the employee.
Yeah.
But especially when you become the boss, when you become a parent of a teenager, when you become a police officer or some kind of position of power, then you realize, there's another side to this.
Right.
Like there's a lot of nuance here, And so I would have to do a lot, and I think I mostly failed because it's so hard to change people, but at least I introduced them to the idea of just like, as a family therapist, you now begin what I began at the beginning of my career, where you have to start to dismantle your entire bias foundation because in order for you to fully help families that involve both parents and children, you have to be able to see each of them as, relatable humans. You have to be able to relate to the stern, even a parent who parents in a way that's very different from the way that you parent, but you can't automatically think that they're pathological. And for you parent-oriented people, you can't automatically look at a kid who is misbehaving as being a quote-unquote little shit that just needs more boundaries. You know what I mean? So my mind was slowly but continually just blown open wide. Repeatedly with these sessions of like, I just had to. So when I watched Turning Red, that's all I was basically trying to say.
You saw both sides.
I'm trying to say like, let's, and so that's my point is, I'm not saying that the mom was right, the kid was wrong.
Right.
I'm saying that if I understood the situation better, I might be able to relate more to the mom. I might be able to understand where she's coming from, what she's trying to do here, and might be able to have a sympathetic view towards her thing. But anyway, so Berto, I'm inserting this little bit here as a notification that the rest of the episode is going to be for patrons of the podcast. We've already recorded it.
Right.
And it went on really long, and it's a whole conversation about...
But I said some very secretive things that I've never revealed before.
Yeah. Are you saying that seriously?
No, I'm just saying that.
Yeah.
I'm saying that so that the patrons go like, oh, wait, I got to listen to that.
I mean, it was just more vulnerable and more personal.
Yeah.
We talk about our friendship. We talk about your...
It is vulnerable.
We talk about your family.
That's right.
We talk about...
so I don't want just any randos listening to that.
We both like cried. I don't know if I've actually cried. That's up there in terms of... and
we got very...
I understand why I cried, but it was kind of odd. I didn't expect to be crying in that moment.
Yeah.
But anyway, so if you
I just thought that you're a little more resilient when I punch you in the nuts like that, but okay.
Jeez. So if you want to find out whether or not Berto punches me in the nuts or not, you can become a patron of the podcast. Otherwise, you will never know the answer to that question.